A gracious good day to you. My name is Oscar Wilde. I was born in Dublin, October 16th, 1854, and died in France, November 30, 1900. I am here today through the kindness of Mr. Valenta, whom you see before you. Mr. Valenta is a gifted trance medium. He has stepped aside temporarily, allowing me the use of his bodily faculties to correct certain things that have attached themselves to my name for the last 100 years. Let me warn you that biography lends a new terror to death. So let's see if I can de-terrorize some things right here and now. I come from a distinguished family. My father was an internationally renowned surgeon, actually the royal surgeon for the Queen, should she ever appear in Ireland. And my mother, Lady Wilde, wrote under the pseudonym of Speranza. She wrote fiery poems and articles in the Irish nationalist newspaper. The name Wilde is actually a short name for de Wilde. My ancestors came from Netherlands, and in the 17th century, one of my ancestors performed a great deal of service for Richard III, and so we were granted land, and we came here to Connaught as landed gentry. My mother always called me her wonderful, and she expected me to make marvelous achievements in life. And she said, make a name for yourself. So what they did was they named me Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wells Wilde. I added the Wells myself at one point. Well, try operating in life with a name like that, won't you just? Actually, their first choice of name was not Oscar, it was Orson. And my mother had begun putting little embroideries on my baby clothes and layette when someone told her that Orson could be a corruption of whoreson. Well, she wasn't going to call me a little bastard, and nor was she going to use any pejorative name for herself. So Orson became Oscar, and Oscar is the name of some Scandinavian king. I seem to be digressing here. Let me get to the point. There are people who like to quote other people. They say that the best quotations come from the Bible or from Shakespeare, and all the rest come from Orson Wilde. What sheer and utter nonsense. At any rate, following my mother's admonition, I decided that money and ambition were the things that meant most to me in life, and I was going to achieve these things, and if not becoming famous, then I should become notorious. Didn't matter to me. I wanted anything. So as soon as I was in London for just a brief time, I heard a passerby say, "Oh, there's that bloody fool Oscar Wilde." And I thought, it's amazing how easy it is to become known in this town. There's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. But once again, I digress. Let me get to the point here. I'm sure you're all wondering about my trials. Well, there's been more than enough said about them. I lost all three of them by an astounding margin, and there's nothing, well, one of them was a hung jury, but since I didn't win, I count it also as a loss. I was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor in Reading jail. The deprivations in that place were simply legion. Restricted visitation, no writing paper. I once collapsed and injured my ear. My hands were in terrible shape because of the hard work of sewing together mail bags. I was suffering this confinement due to homosexual behavior that I had been accused of and convicted of. However, I hereby state that I am not a homosexual. I had a lovely wife, Constance. We lived in Chelsea in a financially perilous but rather stylish condition. We had 2 sons. I loved her dearly. I was a devoted husband and father. So, does that make me a heterosexual? Well, not exclusively. So, what am I? Could you say that the term bisexual applies to me? Or does it apply to everybody? Well, that's another debate. So I deny homo, hetero, and bisexuality. I call myself a trisexual. I'll try just about anything sexual, providing it doesn't smell bad or it's not painful. But once again, I digress. Back to my marriage. How could a happily married husband and father develop a relationship, a physical relationship with another man? In this case, my gentleman lover was Lord Alfred Douglas, the son of the Marquis of Queensberry. What would cause me to do that? Well, this is the part that nobody's ever heard before. I was a tall man, over 6 feet tall. I had large hands, large feet, and you know what they say about men with big feet. They have big shoes, if you derive where I'm heading. Let's put it this way. I was, in terms of manly endowment, I was gifted. In fact, I was very gifted. And so I had to be very careful when my darling Constance and I were having a romance or making love, that I wasn't oafish and clumsy and caused her any kind of discomfort or pain or distress in any way. And at times, if I became lost in my own world of pleasure, I did cause her pain. And it would put her out of commission for a period of time. And there I was, this very sexy, randy fellow, without a place to release all this energy, shall we say. I chose not to dishonor her by finding a mistress. When I made those vows of fidelity and loyalty to her, I meant every word of it, and I intended to keep it for as long as we said we would, till death do us part. So when Bosie, as Lord Douglas liked to be called, presented himself as a man-to-man possibility and, shall we say, relationship, I accepted. How could a married man do that? Well, think about the English boarding school system. Bosie had been there, I'd been there. In that system, there are all kinds of rites of passage that the boys inflict upon one another, humiliating things involving taking their clothes off and doing things that they wouldn't ordinarily think of doing. And so we were all introduced to a greater or lesser degree to sexual behavior between boys. It just happened. And these same boys some of the boys would have a relationship for all the years of schooling and then go off and get married and raise a family, and the thing was just a rite of passage and simply forgotten. So that's how I was just going back to something that I had known about and experienced at a very early age. And so the question is, was I to consort with Bose, or was I to take another lady as my mistress? I felt that it would dishonor my beloved Constance to take another lady. I wanted to honor my vows of fidelity, and so I chose Bose. Now you might say I'm making excuses, I'm rationalizing, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. Well, that's your opinion, and I permit you to have it, but I've told you why I did what I did. So, I've mentioned all of the tragic stuff that happened to me in Reading jail. And so when I was finally released from prison, I made a vow that I would leave London, Ireland, Britain completely and forever. I moved to France, where I had always been well received. I spoke perfect French. I even wrote in French. In some of my many writings, I'm a playwright, I'm an author. And so I even changed my name to Monsieur Sébastien Monmouth, and eked out an existence with a lot of help from my friends. And at one point, my ear began to bother me again from that fall in Reading jail. And so I required surgery, and as a consequence of this surgery, I got an incredible infection way deep inside my cranium, my head, and that is what caused my death. My body was buried in Père Lachaise Cemetery, which is in Paris, a lovely, lovely place. There is over my site there a gigantic slab of, I believe, granite. It's as large as, in profile, it's as large as a car, only it's approximately maybe 20 inches thick. In recent years, Père Lachaise has suffered some vandalism, and so there has been some damage to my monument, I guess, by people who are not fond of me. And so, back to Bose, who was of great assistance. He and I returned to our relationship after I left and abandoned Europe. I was so glad that he saw to my being buried in France, because I didn't want to be back in England. I said Europe, but I meant England. And so I'm looking back on my life, I find that I am a lover. I loved my wife, my children. I loved life. I loved Bose. I loved myself. Yes, anyone who finds that they love themselves is in a lifelong loving relationship. So there I was. I lived also loving life as I did. I lived beyond my means, and when I died, I also died beyond my means. But I want to discuss love with you. Let's use a hypothetical example. Once a couple are together and both love one another, should the gentleman in the relationship stray, shall we say, cheat on his lady love, she will of necessity go into a hatred. I hate you, she'll say, and she'll probably mean it. And so as time goes on, if he comes to his senses and realizes that he's made a serious error and goes to her and says, darling, I apologize, this will never happen again, and he convinces her in one instant she's back in love with him. Now, how can you jump from love to hate like that? That's my question. I don't believe that love and hate are opposites. I believe love is a separate emotion from hate, and they have degrees. You can love someone totally at 100 degrees, say, and if you fall out of love with them, so to speak, because of perhaps a deception or a transgression like that, then you go down to 0. So what is the opposite of love? I'm going to suggest that it's indifference. And that's how I can explain the lady love accepting her gentleman back again, because she goes from indifference to love. The love was always there. Love is a curse. It's eternal. And the hatred she had, she realizes, was for the action or the deception or the unfaithfulness that he committed against her. And so she has always had the hatred of what he did, what his behavior was. So that the hatred is still there, but it was for the action and not for the man, the love object himself. And so that's why I loved Bosie, and I, at this point, questioned, did he love me? You see, Bosie detested, absolutely hated his father, the Marquis of Queensberry. And so, I don't know if he caused it to be known, but somehow the Marquis found out about our liaison and wrote me a scathing letter. And Bosie, I would have ignored it and just said, oh, who cares? But Bosie saw in me the opportunity to use me as an instrument of vengeance against his father. And so he prompted me to bring the Marquis to suit. And of course, we know that whole story. I lost the suits by an astounding margin, as I've said. I think someone who really loved me would have given me better counsel, better guidance, and would not have used me to wreak vengeance upon his detested father. What do you think? Well, at any rate, not having much recourse, I did go back with Bosie. And we enjoyed ourselves. He did help me. I think he meant well. And so wherever he is, I send him thoughts of love and kindness. Here's a confession I'd like to make. There is a 20th century author named Tom Stoppard, and he wrote some wonderful plays. He's a playwright too. And one of his quotes from a play is, and I shall quote it for you, "Do not dabble in paradox, Edward. It puts you in danger of fortuitous wit." Marvelous. Delicious words couched in delicious prose. And I'm going to say something I never would have said in my lifetime. I wish I had said that. Of course, if I'd lived long enough, longer than my 46 years, I might have said something comparable. I know, at any rate, that because it's such a delicious quotation, it has been attributed to my storehouse of wit and wisdom. I, of course, would never have plagiarized or taken for my own any of the things that have been, some of the things that have been attributed to me. You know, we simply must be careful of whom we choose as our enemies, because they possibly can write our biography. The biography is always written by Judas rather than by some kindly intentioned friend. And so, I'm constantly digressing here, with these thoughts in mind, I'd like to ask you a favor. When you hear of me, or when you think of me or speak of me, I'd asking for clemency, for kindness, for the thought in mind of what I left behind, what my legacy is, what I contributed to the world of art. I lived for art, and that is what I offer you instead of some of the things that have been said about me over the past 100 years. And so, with that request, which I hope you'll honor, I bid you goodbye and adieu, or so long, or au revoir, and I say thank you very much, merci beaucoup. Especially Mr. Valenta here is letting me know that he wants to recapture his body, and so I say a blessed thank you to him too. Adieu.